Hello, it's What the Doodle here, and in this session we're going to talk about an anti-Rust article that appeared, and in fact, it's this article here, which is by Austin Sparks, and it says apparently he spent 18 months rebuilding his algorithmic trading platform in Rust, and now apparently he's filled with regret. Now, this article has been picked up actually by ThePrimeagen, and I've actually watched all of this in its entirety, and I would suggest that you guys also, if you're interested, have a look at it. Now, in terms of my sort of review of this, I'm not going to go in detail and pick up every single point, but on balance, I'd say that actually ThePrimeagen has been very fair in his assessment. Now, there's a few things obviously since this article was posted by Austin. There's a few other things in terms of information and context has come out, which makes things a bit clearer. And I would say that ThePrimeagen has been actually exceptionally kind towards the original article, which I would almost say that it's essentially a bait article, a clickbait, and I mean that's just being very generous. And if we go back to the actual article itself, there is, just a bunch of things that stand out straight away. Obviously, a lot of it is I would just you cannot take it seriously essentially because if we go through his actual contention and try and sort of unpack it a little bit, you know, he you have to understand the context, and I think that's important. So if we jump over, and this is actually from the author himself. If we actually zoom in a little bit, this is the actual context behind this article, which was not available, I don't think, at the time when he wrote it, or when he posted it, or certainly ThePrimeagen didn't see the context around it because I dug a little bit deeper, and essentially, if you look at it, he's in his own words, he's basically saying that he's learning Rust on the go, and in other areas he has essentially mentioned that he didn't actually learn Rust at all. In fact, all he did was he jumped straight into a programming language which is known to have a particular learning curve towards it, and he just skipped all of that, jumped completely head first into the deep end, and he actually leaned heavily on Chat GPT and other sort of AI code assistants. Now, AI code assistants, use of them itself is not bad. They can be massively help you leverage in terms of productivity. However, the issue is if you are leaning on them against a language you don't, or a language that you're unfamiliar with, there's only so far you can go with that, because fundamentally you need to understand the language and what you're doing. In fact, almost 99% of Austin's criticism actually stem from this root cause, which is the fact that he hasn't actually learned Rust properly, and this is there's ample evidence of this from his own words. We can see here, for example. So if we go through this, he's actually admitting that he hasn't actually learned Rust. He's just dive straight in, and a lot of people have in the Rust community and in his conversation with other people have pointed out the issues, that the things where he's been incorrect, and he's agreed to it because he's saying, for example, since posting this article on Reddit, I've learned that I am in fact an idiot. Essentially, I was using strings for the return error type, which lost all of the information, and I've changed all of my errors to the color Irie crate, and it's way better. Thus, I agree the point too as well. So essentially, his main central criticism about the error handling, he didn't know what he was doing essentially, and obviously after the community had pointed out, and by the way, he'd slammed one of the, if we go back in his article, one of the things that he slammed was the, obviously he's saying that the error handling is terrible and this kind of stuff, and then the community is apparently very, the community is very bad and very elitist and all this kind of stuff, and this is complete nonsense because if you look at what he's saying is that after actually conversing with the community, they have actually solved his problem, not solved his problem, but essentially helped him on the issues that he was having, because he most of it again stems back from the fact that he doesn't actually know Rust and he hasn't learnt it, and he is essentially trying to write Rust using AI code assistance, and it's like that is a recipe for failure. Actually, learn the language first, and then have your criticism. That's a fairer way. And even the fact that code like this where he's doing essentially he's trying to if you look at this, I probably don't Rust idiomatically. What I usually do is something like this: x is none, return x, let x, and then unwrap it. And it's like, this is terrible. This is not this is absolutely not a idiomatic way. And there are so many better ways of handling this. I mean, if he's essentially looking for a way of short circuiting an error type, result type, or an option type, there are much better ways, and there are built-in mechanisms. Again, this is sort of almost Rust 101, and it's something that you would pick up quite early on. And in fact, what we can do is I can give an example of this none value, which is an optional type. Let's fire up a terminal, and I'll show you what I mean, because it's a lot easier to actually show rather than trying to describe it. So what we'll do, let's clear the screen. We'll do cargo new, and we'll just say something like default. Okay. So what we'll do is run the the binary. So compile, do the initial compile. That's fine. And if we actually edit it. So imagine you have a function. Let's just call it foo, and this returns an option type. And I don't know, just say it returns a sort of a number. Fine. And in this case, we're going to simulate the fact that there is no actual value here, because this is an optional type. Then if you imagine there's some complex operation or whatever, and it's supposed to return some value, some number or whatever, but it also could be the fact that for whatever reason it doesn't. It's a good way of modeling the absence of a value, and obviously your program then has to handle that. So all he was doing is there's so many ways of doing it, because he wants to essentially kind of get to this value but default it if it doesn't exist. And so let's say we can do that. We can literally just say we can call this function, and there's literally unwrap instead of or you can do an unwrap or, and we can set that to a default value. So what will happen is essentially so if we run this, and look, there you go, the values, because there are sort of methods built into that optional type essentially. And that's just only one example. There's lots of other ways of doing it. There's if we go back to his because he then later on learned about using OK or else, and there's so many different ways of doing it. There's like if lets. There's numerous ways of doing it, but the way he was doing is completely unidiomatic, which is understandable because he hasn't learned Rust. So there are multiple issues with the article. I mean, if we go on. Here's another point where he's saying that he never actually learned C or C++. He's only known TypeScript and Python, which is dynamic languages, a bit of Java and Go. He says maybe if I started with C++, I would appreciate Rust's strictness a lot more. So he hasn't learned Rust. He doesn't have a background in sort of systems programming and what Rust is trying to achieve and all this kind of stuff. And then and not knowing it correctly, he's then gone on essentially what I would just say an unobjective rant. Essentially, it's an unqualified rant that he's gone across, and then obviously when he's caught out, like the community have actually pushed back and said, and all of these things have been pointed out. Obviously, ThePrimeagen has done, I would say he's been really, really sort of kind towards Austin in terms of that, in terms of his assessment, and he's once, instead of putting his hands up and saying, yeah, okay, those areas were incorrect, all this kind of stuff. He's actually now doing the usual, we see this sort of on the internet behavior where it says, lol, I was only just joking. And that's essentially what he's trying to say. Oh, this post wasn't supposed to be serious, and all this kind of stuff. Essentially, what happened is Austin does not know Rust. He hasn't bothered to learn Rust. He's used ChatGPT. He's sort of leaned on that in order to rewrite, an application using Rust, which has a fairly steep learning curve. And then when he's, predictably, when he's then run into these issues, he has then gone to the internet, gone to different communities, and then he's essentially, if you have a look at his article, and he says about the community, how he's gone to the community, and then they have come back, and they have actually answered a lot of his questions that he's asked, but he was ranting at the community almost. And this is one of those XY, a lot of people picked up on the fact that, MongoDB, unless you have a very, very, if you have a very specific requirement, most people most developers or engineers would point out the fact, correctly so, I would add, that, for relational data, you really want to use something like Postgres. It is the better choice. It's the most, technically speaking, it's the better choice for the kind of things that he's trying to achieve. And that's what people were trying to actually help him. But unfortunately, it seems that Austin's ego is kind of like just ignoring, what people aren't doing in the case. I mean, he's saying it's kind of the case of his own ego is kind of tripping over the and not allowing him to see that, well, people aren't saying it out of eliteness or malice or on this kind of stuff. The engineers in the community, I mean, there may be some individual who can't speak for everyone, of course, but generally, giving his specific situation, and people are trying to be helpful. They're seeing, it's like if somebody was to turn up, as an example, and they said, hey, I've got a petrol car, but I've poured diesel in here. Can you help me solve this problem? I keep pouring diesel in my petrol car. My engine keeps blowing up. What's going wrong? Now, most people would try and help them and say, look, the issue is that you really shouldn't be using diesel. It's a petrol engine. You should be pouring petrol. And then for him to turn and say, hey, man, just give me a solution. Give me, stop trying to tell me to use, try to use petrol. Just tell me, how I can carry on using this diesel. Oh, you're such a vile community, you're such a reprehensible, unapproachable community, and you're so elitist and gatekeeping and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that is what the community is not trying to do. People are genuinely trying to help you and trying to show that, okay, look, MongoDB, there may be reasons where you'd use it, but there are better, in terms, if you want to use a relational database, then there are, you would be better served in terms from a technical perspective in terms of your platform and what you're trying to do. That's what people picked up on. MongoDB, I would say almost universally is hated, and there are reasons for that. This is a completely different topic, of course, about NoSQL databases, but so this idea. So a lot of these points that he talks about, again, these are all flawed. There isn't any sort of concrete criticism. If the thing is, it's not that all languages have issues and trade-off, and that's understandable. And if these were valid criticisms, that's absolutely fine. But even as ThePrimeagen, when he sort of reviewed all of this stuff, even he sort of realized, hang on a minute, there does seem to be a lot of skill issues. And he did mention that. And that's because it was almost obvious, it was almost painfully obvious that this was, absolutely, it was a skill issue. And, the more you find out in terms of the context around, in his own words, when he's saying, like the fact that he doesn't even know the fundamentals or the basics because of the fact that he just rushed head first into the deep end, without any clue what he's actually doing and relying heavily on ChatGPT in order to save him, essentially. And then he's complaining, oh, it's not working. Why is this not working and whatnot? I mean, even things like, if we go back, because there is an aspect he talks about, how do I even, enable stack traces? And it's like, seriously, you don't know how? I mean, that's, like if you Google Rust enable stack trace, it's an environmental flag that you pass in, and I mean, what is it? How do I not the tracing library? Um, I'm just trying to see it here. It is. I think it's something like Rust. I think it's something like backtrace or something. Yeah, there you go. It's as simple as you pass it as an environment variable. So, in Bash, for example, if you have the environment variable, Rust underscore backtrace equal one. There is another one which is equals full as well. So one will give you kind of like the shortened or abridged version of the backtrace. And if you do Rust underscore backtrace underscore equals full, that will give you the full backtrace. But of course, he may have also because in his in in here he says somewhere about that backtrace, which made me chuckle a little bit. I'm just trying to find it here. Where is it? Let's have a look. And no, this is a tangent that he's talking about. What he despises about Rust. Let's have a look. Yeah, he's talking about how if you he's saying that he didn't know about. He said perhaps I'm a goddamn idiot because when I encounter in Rust, I'm in La La Land trying to figure out what the hell happened, and he was doing the equivalent of using print line to intersperse everywhere. This isn't needed, of course. If you enable the full backtrace, you get far more detailed. But of course, in his particular case, I think he's using asynchronous code. And if you type, there is even nicer stuff in entire frameworks dedicated to it. So if you, I think it's called like something like trace or something, async tracing. There is an entire framework by Tokyo, I believe. And I'm just so it's called tracing. So if I show you this, and let me just get to the actual page itself. So tracing.rs. It doesn't take that long to look for it. Let me just, where's the actual, because he has a nice website for it. Where is it gone? It's here. So this framework, there's an entire framework dedicated to asynchronous, and it isn't just for Tokyo. It'll work for standard async as well. But it's essentially, the what is it? The accusation that there is no good tracing, all this kind of stuff, it's just complete nonsense. I mean, this entire framework will give you really, really granular, structured, diagnostic. So it's really not really at a loss what to say, and this can be found within a few seconds of just googling. It's just basic 101 googling. I'm not suggesting that you have to even use this because, as I said, if you enable full if you enable the stack trace, you'd see it anyway. And also the fact that in his own admission, in Austin's own admission, there was lots of different crates, lots of different ways of solving this. It isn't, he genuinely was just passing around strings for errors and not in a structured way. So of course it's not surprising that he then, because he didn't even, I don't think he even understood, even based on this, he didn't even understood about option types and result types. He didn't understand, that fundamental concept, which he would have understood if he actually sat down and learnt Rust properly. He didn't. He skipped all of that and then crashed into a wall, unsurprisingly. And then instead of trying to understand, and then decided to just rant like crazy and blame the language, essentially say, "Oh, it's a language fault." Actually, what it is, it's a fault of his understanding. It's a lack of his understanding of these basic concepts. And then that adage comes again. A bad worker blames his tool, essentially, and that's essentially what this is. This entire rant is this. Of course, the sad thing is a lot of people will not read past the actual headline, sort of the title, the clickbait title. And this is what it is. Unfortunately, a lot of people read this and think, I spent 18 months rebuilding my algorithmic trading platform in Rust. And they'll think, wow, he's obviously must have something like 18 months of worth of Rust experience or whatever it is. And it's like, actually, this is a guy who had zero, zero Rust experience, jumped in using ChatGPT to kind of essentially, essentially like a bull in a china shop to try and rewrite his entire application. What other than failure what was going to be the outcome of this? So anyway, that's my take on this. I think it's and then to sort of hit back and then say, oh, it was all just a joke. Well, this is very damaging. I'd say this is very irresponsible, and very very damaging because it's I mean it's obviously it's clickbaity. But what will happen, unfortunately, now I think hats off to ThePrimeagen because as I've said numerous times before, he has been very balanced on it, and I think not just only balanced, he's been overly kind to Austin because, as I said, this essentially what I see here is essentially a clown. Austin is essentially a clown, and he's even admitted himself that he's an idiot. And that's not me saying he's an idiot. He himself is realizing that's very idiotic of him. But to then try and hide behind and say, oh, this was just humor. This post was just humorous. That may be if that's what you're hiding behind and that's what you're trying to say, then change your title and just say, oh, this is just humor, by the way. But it's clearly not because he was ranting. He knew this was clickbaity, but it does have a negative impact because a lot of people are not going to read past the headline. Most people don't. They will just see this, and all of the anti-Rust crowd are obviously have. I probably would not be surprised. They're going to jump on the back of this as a bandwagon and then sort of keep on promoting this as kind of like as kind of the poster example or a case study of like, oh, look how terrible it is. And it's like, it isn't. And then, yeah, this is, it's a clown. Unfortunately, all I can say is that it's a clown article. And, I'm not going to be as nice, if you like, and diplomatic as ThePrimeagen has been. But essentially, the TLDR of this, the conclusion is an individual who does not know Rust, didn't bother to learn it, dived straight into the deep end using ChatGPT, thinking that ChatGPT would essentially help him guide through, and then he crashed and burned because he didn't understand any of the fundamentals or the basics, then went on an absolute massive rant to the community and the developers and Reddit and everywhere when people tried to help him because of his ego rather than admit that he'd didn't actually understand those concepts, and they were actually trying to sort of nudge him and help him towards a better solution. He starts denigrating the community, saying, "Oh, they're all being elite," and it's like, no one's being elite. People are trying to help you. That isn't the community. That isn't the community being elitist. So all in all, that's all I have on in terms of my opinion on this, and I hope you like the new layout as well. For those who previously watched previous sessions, I've now gone for a better use of the layout, and hopefully that is easier to see and whatnot. Okay, until the next time, I'll see you on the next one.